What's good, YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we are addressing the Magnificent Monsters points update. So, Konami went ahead and decided to drop last night the points update for Magnificent Monsters, and overall, I am kind of happy with the list. There's a couple things missing that I do want to discuss, but getting right into the point adjustments, first we have Kuriboh Multiply to 10. Now, Kuriboh Multiply, I think, is ultimately a really strong card. It has the effect that when your opponent activates a monster effect or they declare an attack, quick effect, you can special summon this card from your hand. Then, once per turn, when your opponent activates a monster effect on the field or during damage calculation, or when an opponent's monster attacks, quick effect, you can add to your hand or special summon from your deck or graveyard one Dark Magician or one monster with 300 attack / 200 defense. Then you can change that opponent's monster's attack to 0. So obviously, just summoning Dark Magician isn't all that great. However, this stat line of monsters with 300 attack / 200 defense does include a lot of support over the years. So obviously, you have Kuriboh Multiply. You also have Detonating Kuriboh, which is a very bad negate. It stops now the third monster effect that they've activated. You also have things like Grifo. So this is also a starter for the Light and Darkness Ritual deck. And then you also have all of the Power Patron cards. So you have the Elf Note, the Archmage, and Doomsday Power Patrons all available to you. I believe the best line you technically have would be the Elf Note Power Patron, of course, for 15 points, where, you could potentially set up a Herald, which is funny. Not good, but funny. And ultimately, I do think this card was deserving of the points. The fact that it's another starter for Rolad specifically means I'm very happy with these 10 points added on. Then we get to Dark Magical Curtain. Dark Magical Curtain is now 30 points, and ultimately, I'm glad it is. So it says each player can special summon a Dark Spellcaster monster from their hand or deck, but neither player can activate their effects this turn. Then if you special summon a monster whose original name is Dark Magician or Dark Magician Girl, you can add a spell / trap that mentions Dark Magician from your deck to your hand, except for itself. And of course, you can only activate one per turn. So I think that pointing this card up to 30 points means it's still playable in Dark Magician. There's not many cards that are pointed in Dark Magician. You have the Dark Magician of Destruction, which I want to say is 15. You have Gaze, which is either 1 or 10. I don't remember off the top of my head. And then you have, obviously, Dragoon, who's 100 points, so we were never playing him to begin with. But putting this at 30 points, it's searchable within Dark Magician, and pretty much keeps it to just being played in Dark Magician and not any other deck. The other thing I wanted to point out is it has this line, neither player can activate their effects this turn. So that stops activated effects, but it's not going to stop continuous effects. I was looking through what the funniest counters were to this card in case, it was low enough that it saw more play. And so far, Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer appears to be the best one. Then we get to Wing Kuriboh Sabatiel, level 10, who's now 7 points. And by the way, that is a hard thing to read on the points list where they have the 10, the arrow, then the 7. It looks like it's going down from 10 to 7 points. However, this is primarily a hero card. It's adding a polymerization spell or fusion spell and then locking you into heroes for the rest of the turn. I think that ultimately that's fine. It's getting you to either a card like Destiny Fusion, which is pretty heavily pointed. It also could get you to Neos Fusion. It's getting you to Polymerization at the least. It could also get you to Super Polymerization. I think because of all of the different cards this card has access to within the hero deck, I'm perfectly fine with it being 7 points. Also, funnily enough, it's searchable off of the Kuriboh Multiply, so, you can't really play both together. But I'm happy this is 7 points. I don't think the hero deck needs a lot of points. I do think it needs some, though, when it gets some of these kind of generic searchers. Stardust Dragon Victim Sanctuary is a generic level 8 synchro that is an Omni Negate for whenever your opponent responds to your card. I think this card going up to 15 points is very warranted. The fact generic level 8 Omni Negate is very scary. And also the fact that it's able to bring back Stardust Synchro monsters. And I definitely think it should be at least 15 points as a generic end board piece. Then we get to Starjunk Synchron being pointed to 1 point. Ultimately, I'm fine with this being 1 point. It substitutes for any Synchron tuner. And then it also has the effect where it can target a level 2's engrave. You special summon this and that monster, negating its effects. And then you do get synchro locked. I think ultimately this is fine. I don't know exactly what they're trying to box out by putting this to 1 point, but I'm ultimately fine with it being 1 point. Then we get to, in my opinion, the worst pointed card on this entire list, Synchro Emergency. This is a turn 0 trap where you can special summon a monster from your hand, negating its effects. And then if they have a monster from the extra deck, you can special summon a Synchron monster from the deck. And then you are synchro locked until the end of the next turn. And then you can banish it from the graveyard to then immediately perform a synchro summon. This card is 5 points, which means any deck that is a synchro deck can easily allocate 15 points towards this deck and have access to at least a turn 0 Black Rose, assuming they have any level 4 in hand, as long as they have like a level 3 like the Starjunk Synchron or any, like even just normal Junk Synchron. I don't think you'd play normal Junk Synchron, you'd play one with a better effect in the grave. But this is getting you to a turn 0 Black Rose that theoretically you could use at any point during their turn. It's not saying during the main phase, it's just during their turn while they control a monster, you can activate it from the hand. And then you're summoning that Synchron monster from the deck. And then at any point you can go ahead and banish this from the graveyard to perform that Synchro summon for Black Rose. So you could wait until the end phase. Once they've built their board, assuming they don't have any negates or anything and they've set everything face down, then you can go ahead and fire the Synchro Emergency or wait for the optimal time to use it. Either way, this card seems to me like it should have been a 10-point card. In some ways, it is better than Harmonia because you're summoning a monster from your hand. If you have anything with the relevant graveyard effect, then you're getting to use that card too because it's only negating that monster's effect while it's on the field. So, assuming it has some sort of relevant graveyard effect, now you're also benefiting in other ways. I genuinely think this card should have been at least 10 points and not 5. And speaking of those 5 points, number 39, Utopia Emissary of Light, from what I can tell, it's just an OTK enabler, and it can protect something from being destroyed. I don't know why they gave this thing 5 points. If there's anything that I'm missing, let me know in the comment section, but I don't think this card should be worth any points. If anything, I would say take the 5 from this and put it on Synchro Emergency. Then we get to Gagaga Magician, Gagaga Magic. This card is now 6 points. I think 6 points is ultimately fine. It's kind of, I don't know another card to compare it to off the top of my head, but you special summon this card and one of the Onamat cards from your hand or grave, and then perform an XYZ summon for one of the Onamat names or Heroic Champions numbers, just the longest different kinds of XYZ monsters using those two. And then you can go ahead and treat the level of 1 as the same as the other. So if you have, let's just say, Dododo Warrior in your hand, I think that thing was pointed out to oblivion, but you could treat it as a level 4 monster when you're summoning it with this. So I think this is fine at 6 points. It's just another card towards the rank 4 pile deck. But ultimately, I think the locks where it can only summon these kinds of monsters leave it to be perfectly fine. Last 2 cards on the list, we have Rainbow Bridge Bifrost, which is basically just terraforming at the cost of banishing 3 level 10 or higher monsters from your extra deck, including a light synchro monster. It also has a hard once per turn compared to the old terraforming. Overall, it's just a consistency card. It requires some extra deck things, and this card loses to Lancia. So I think this is fine at 10 points. I like consistency cards being lower in points, but until we have all of the consistency cards a little bit lower in sort of this range, I'm fine with this being at 10 for now. And then finally we have Malefic Paradigm Shift. So this adds to your hand or places face up in your field zone a Malefic World from deck or graveyard. Then special summons a Malefic monster from your deck or extra deck in defense position, ignoring its summoning conditions. Then if your opponent controls a monster with 2,500 or more attack, all monsters they currently control lose 2,500 attack until the end of this turn. And then you can activate it by paying half of your life points, and it's a hard once for the activation. So this is another turn 0 hand trap. So I can understand the concern of this card, like something like Synchro Emergency, where it's getting your engine started. But Malefic has almost never been playable outside of things like the skill drain combos, so where your monster now has 4,000 attack and can attack anyway. I think that's bad. The like all of the Malefic cards in history. So I think this card shouldn't be 8 points. I can see something degenerate happening where you're putting Malefic World up, you're getting your Malefic monster from deck or extra, but the cards all require bricks. And if you're adding a Malefic card off of the world, I think that's just fine. That's what Malefic is trying to do. I think it's insane that this deck has now more points on it than Melfi. When this card is just, this deck has been historically bad. Also, funnily enough, this is now more points than Synchro Emergency. I don't know in what world this card is better than Synchro Emergency, but it's worth more points. Now some honorable mentions. Infernal Strike Fighter. None of these cards are on the list, but I did want to draw attention to them from this set. Infernal Strike Fighter says, during main phase 2, you can destroy as many face-up monsters on the field as possible, then inflict damage to your opponent equal to their levels times 200. Very similar to the original Dark Strike Fighter. And then if this card is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can target a level 5 or lower machine monster in your graveyard, special summon it in defense position. Ultimately, I think the best application for this card is going to be in a deck like Crystron, as they all get effects, or a lot of them get effects when they're destroyed. However, that effect only happens during main phase 2, so it's only really good as a going second tool anyway. So I think this card's fine. I don't think it necessarily needs points, but it is a very strong card for Crystron to have access to. And in case that deck becomes too powerful, I could see something like this getting points, but ultimately I don't think it needs points. Then we get to Underworld Circle. I think this card is a problem. Activate this card if both players have 5 or more monsters in their graveyards, destroy as many monsters on the field as possible, then each player banishes face down as many monsters from their deck as possible, then you can special summon 1 normal monster from your graveyard. And then once per turn during the standby phase, activate this effect. Each player can special summon 1 monster from their graveyard, ignoring its summoning conditions, but banish it when it leaves the field. You can only activate 1 Underworld Circle per duel. Now, this is a continuous spell. Continuous spells are notoriously weak to interruption, so if you MST it, it's not going to resolve. However, I don't think this card lets people play Yu-Gi-Oh! And with that, I mean, you let your opponent set up their board. They're most likely going to have 5 or more monsters in their grave, as the grave is a second hand in Yu-Gi-Oh! And then you start trying to break through their board. Let's say you're playing a deck that has a normal monster. We'll say Blue Eyes or Dark Magician, something like that as an example. And then once you've gone through and broken through enough of their board, you can go ahead and fire Underworld Circle to board wipe, summon back a monster from your grave, and completely banish all the monsters in the deck. I feel like once that happens, you're no longer playing Yu-Gi-Oh! As you've effectively cut your opponent off of pretty much all of their resources. Obviously, you're doing it to yourself as well. And so it's dependent on, you know, the monsters left in hand. Maybe they might have something in face-up banish that they have. Highly unlikely. And then you might say, oh, it's balanced because they're each standby phase, the player is summoning a monster from their graveyard. This is a continuous spell. You can just remove it yourself after you've gone ahead and done that. And now your opponent has to be able to try and find some other way to summon those monsters back from grave in order to even play the game anymore. I think this card is kind of emblematic of something like Last Turn. And I don't think this card really should be in the format, just because of the kind of game it can create. Obviously, we can see if it ends up doing anything, but I think at 0 points, this card has a lot of potential to be a problem, and I would have preferred if it was pointed out of the format. And then the final card that I wanted to discuss for Magnificent Monsters is Ruler of the End of the World, or End of the World Ruler. I don't remember exactly how they named this card in the TCG. But you can ritual summon it with End of the World, irrelevant. It becomes Demise King of Armageddon while hand or field, irrelevant. And then you can only use each of the following effects once per turn. This is the relevant part. You can reveal this card in your hand, pay 2,000 life points, then banish one ritual spell from your deck. Apply that card's activation effect. That ritual summons a monster. So to be clear, this card is basically your second or your fourth, fifth, and sixth copy of any ritual spell in the game. The best ritual spell I can think of would be something like the Mitsurugi ritual. And that goes ahead and either tributes from deck, tributes from hand or field, and bypasses that requirement where you can only use 2 of the effects per turn. Like, you can only use each effect per turn. And this is essentially letting you activate one of those again. Now, in Genesys, that may be a little bit harder to do as Ritual is 51 points. However, as long as you have access to any of the level 8 rituals from hand, you can activate Ruler of the End of the World, banish the Mitsurugi ritual from deck, summon the, let's just say, Murakumo from hand, and you can dump Kusanagi, which can now add back the ritual from the banishment to your hand, so then you can activate it, send the Murakumo from field, summon Futsu from deck, and I think that's where this card is definitely going to be a problem. I think Mitsurugi gets a major power-up with this card. Obviously, it's not searchable, and with only one ritual spell, it's not as good, but I genuinely think this card should have been at least 10 points to mirror Pre-Preparation of Rites and Ragged Record of Rites, given that it has such a similar effect for this deck as it does as those cards do for Mitsurugi. So I'm really disappointed. It kind of feels like Konami looked at the main set list and everything that comes from the main packs and completely forgot about the cards from the bonus pack, and Ruler of the End of the World really should have been pointed. But those are all of the points from the Magnificent Monsters point update, and my opinions on maybe what should have gotten more points, what should have gotten less points. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.